Welcome to TB Dahl Audiobooks. Before the story begins, please take a quick second to subscribe and leave a comment below. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, enjoy the listen.
And that map includes information about us. It includes your identity designations, your placement records, your monitoring protocols, and potentially your biological family records. Elliot stood. He walked to the hallway, checked the front door deadbolt, then moved to the rear stairwell and listened. 30 seconds. Silence. He came back. 2 more questions, he said. Then we need to decide whether we're staying or leaving. Katerina nodded once. First, you said the danger comes from more than one side. Opportunists selling information, restorationists wanting to reveal us, Russian-linked actors wanting to erase us. Is anyone else involved? Norwegian authorities? Intelligence services? Are the police who took our statements part of this? I do not believe Norwegian police are involved in the conspiracy. But I believe that the crime scene at the museum will attract attention from organizations beyond local law enforcement. PST, your domestic security service, may become interested. Norwegian intelligence, if they learn the Russian connection, will certainly become interested. These are institutions that act cautiously and often cooperatively with their government. They are not enemies, but they are not allies either. They have their own priorities, and those priorities may not align with your survival. Second question, Elliot said. Why tonight? You could have contacted us at any point. You clearly have the resources: safe house, phones, cash, surveillance capability. Why wait until after Henrik died? Why wait until we'd been followed, chased through the city, and forced into hiding? Why not come to us 3 days ago and prevent all of this? Katerina looked at him for a long time. The candlelight carved her face into planes and shadows. Cheekbone, brow, the deep line beside her mouth. Because I was overruled, she said. I wanted to approach you months ago. The table voted against it. The majority believed the protocols were holding. Henrik disagreed. I disagreed. We were told to wait. Henrik stopped waiting. I waited too long. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. Not dramatically. A hairline fracture, visible only because the rest of her composure was so total. She blinked once, set her jaw. The fracture sealed. I am here now, she said. That is what I can offer. I am here, and I know enough of what File 17 contains to help you understand why you are being hunted. Not all of it, not tonight, but enough to keep you moving in the right direction. Riley looked at Elliot. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them that neither could have named. Not trust, not agreement, but a shared recognition. They were standing at the same edge, the same drop. Whatever Katerina Volkova was offering, it was more than they had 10 minutes ago, and less than they needed. Elliot gave the smallest nod. Riley turned back to Katerina. We're not joining your organization. We're not following your protocols. We're not symbols, and we're not instruments. You want to help us? Start by telling us what File 17 actually says about who we are. Not tonight, you've made that clear. But soon. And when you do, you tell us everything, not the version you've decided we're ready for. Katerina's chin dipped. Acknowledgement, not submission. There is one more thing you should know before you decide whether to stay the night here or leave. What? The letters Henrik sent you, the ones signed H.R. He did not sign them as Honest Russia. He signed them as himself. Henrik Rask. He wanted you to know, if you ever traced the initials, that a real person had sent them, not an institution. A man who had watched over you for decades and never introduced himself. Riley closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, they were dry. "We'll stay tonight," she said. "We leave before first light. And tomorrow, you start talking." Katerina stood. She gathered the tea service with the quiet precision of a woman who had cleaned up after difficult conversations before. She carried the tray to the kitchen, and Riley heard water running, porcelain placed on a rack, the small domestic sounds that belonged to a world where people made tea and washed cups and didn't carry emergency bags with cash and border maps. Elliot stayed by the hallway. He hadn't moved to a comfortable position the entire time. His eyes tracked the front door, then the rear stairwell, then back. "She's not telling us everything," he said, low enough that only Riley could hear. "No."
"You believe the part she did tell?" Riley picked up the silver cross from where she'd placed it on the table. AM 1918. She turned it in her fingers, thought about initials. H.R. Henrik Rask. Honest Russia. R-17. E-17. Letters that were codes, and codes that were people, and people who had been watching her since before she could form a memory. "I believe she knew Henrik Rask," Riley said. "I believe she's afraid. And I believe that whatever File 17 contains, it's bad enough that people are willing to kill for it, and careful enough that a 71-year-old woman is sitting in a safe house at 4 a.m. with packed bags and maps of the Finnish border." She set the cross on the table. "I don't trust her, but I believe she's real." Elliot checked the front door one more time, then the rear stairwell, then the windows. The first gray light of a northern dawn was beginning to seep through the curtains. Not sunrise yet, but its promise, thin as paper, pressing against the glass. He sat down in the chair nearest the hallway. He didn't lean back. "First light," he said. "Then we move." Riley couldn't sleep. She lay on the narrow bed in Katerina's spare room, still dressed, boots unlaced but on, staring at the plaster ceiling where a water stain mapped a country she didn't recognize. The pillow smelled of lavender sachets and old linen, the kind of scent that belonged to someone's grandmother's house, not a safe flat equipped with emergency bags and Finnish border maps. Through the wall, she heard Elliot shift in his chair. He hadn't taken the other room. He'd positioned himself in the hallway, between the front door and the bedroom corridor, and every few minutes, she caught the creak of floorboards as he adjusted, checked a sight line, adjusted again. He was sleeping the way soldiers slept, if he was sleeping at all. At 5:09 a.m. by the clock on the nightstand, Riley gave up. She swung her legs off the bed, laced her boots, and walked into the kitchen. Katerina was already there. She stood at the counter in the same dark clothing from hours earlier, but she'd added a wool cardigan with deep pockets and had pinned her silver hair tighter. A stovetop kettle hissed. 2 cups sat on saucers. A third waited on the counter, turned upside down. She glanced at Riley without surprise. "I assumed you wouldn't sleep." "You assumed right." The kettle clicked. Katerina poured water over loose tea in a ceramic pot. Not bags, not instant. A proper ritual performed with the careful hands of someone for whom the preparation itself was the point. She set the pot on a folded cloth between the cups. Steam curled upward and dissolved. Elliot appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face carried the flat neutrality of someone who had processed the night's information by filing it away rather than feeling it.
The bruise on his forearm from the construction site escape had darkened overnight, visible where his sleeve rode up. "We said first light," he said. "It's first light." "Sit down," Katerina said. Not a request. The tone of a woman who had spent decades managing conversations with people who wanted to leave rooms. "I promised I would tell you more. I am going to do that now. You can walk out at any point, but you should hear this before you decide where to go next." Riley pulled out a kitchen chair. The wood scraped against tile. She sat. Elliot remained in the doorway for 3 more seconds, scanning the kitchen window, the back corridor, the position of the emergency bags, before he took the chair nearest the exit. Katerina poured tea into the 2 upright cups. She left the third inverted. "Who decided?" Riley said. Katerina's hand paused over the teapot. "Who decided what? Who decided to split us up? You confirmed last night that Elliot and I are siblings. You confirmed we were separated as infants and placed with different families. So I'm asking you directly, who made that decision? And on what authority?" Katerina set the teapot down. She folded her hands on the table, one over the other, knuckles white against the age spots. Her face was composed, but something behind her eyes shifted. Not guilt exactly, but the weight of having carried a particular piece of knowledge for too long. "The decision was made by the Northern Table, the Scandinavian cell of Honest Russia. There were 5 members at that time. Henrik Rask was one. I was another." The kitchen went very still. Even the kettle's residual ticking seemed to pause. "You," Riley said. "Yes. You helped separate us. I voted in favor of the separation. I believed at the time that it was the only way to keep both of you alive." Riley's jaw tightened. She didn't look at Elliot. She kept her eyes on Katerina, reading the older woman's face the way she read briefing subjects, searching for the gap between what was offered and what was withheld. "Tell me why." Katerina drew a breath, held it for a beat, released it through her nose. The radiator against the far wall ticked and settled. "Your biological parents, I will tell you about them, but not yet, not in full, came to the attention of several factions within Honest Russia before you were born. Your mother was a researcher. She uncovered connections in old émigré archives that linked her own family to the records in File 17. When she brought her findings to people she believed were historians and archivists, she did not understand that she was walking into the middle of a decades-old argument about what to do with those records. An argument between the factions you described last night. Yes, the Keepers wanted to bury everything deeper. The Restorationists wanted to document the bloodline and prepare it for future exposure. The Opportunists saw leverage, and the Reformists believed the evidence should be preserved for a political moment that had not yet arrived. And our parents were caught between these factions." Katerina's hands tightened on each other. "Your parents believed they were dealing with a historical society, a group of scholars and archivists interested in Russian émigré genealogy. By the time they understood the political dimension, they were already inside the network. And then you were born." "Both of us," Elliot said from the doorway chair. His voice was flat, stripped of inflection. It was the first time he'd spoken since entering the kitchen. Katerina turned to him. Something in her expression fractured, brief, controlled, but visible. She looked at Elliot the way people look at photographs of places they've lost. "Both of you, together. And that changed everything." "Why?" Riley pressed. "Because one child connected to File 17 was a secret that could be managed. 2 children, twins, born at the same time to the same parents, were a pattern. Patterns attract attention. Patterns can be found by people looking for exactly that kind of evidence. You're saying we were too conspicuous together. I am saying that the Russian state services had been monitoring émigré genealogical research for years. Not closely, they considered most of it harmless nostalgia. But the emergence of 2 children in a single family connected to the specific bloodline documented in File 17 would have created a signal. 2 data points instead of 1. 2 names in the same hospital records, the same municipal registry, the same school system. 2 children who could be cross-referenced, tracked, and eventually identified. Riley felt the logic settling over her like a net. She hated it. Hated that it made sense. Hated that she could see the intelligence calculus behind it. Hated that her training in political risk analysis made her understand exactly why a protection-minded faction would separate twins connected to a sensitive bloodline. Understanding was not the same as accepting. So you split us up. We placed you with different families. Both Norwegian, both vetted. Both outside the Honest Russia network, so there would be no organizational trail. Different neighborhoods, different schools, different surnames. We created a gap wide enough that no routine search, governmental, journalistic, genealogical, would connect you to each other or to the records in File 17. And our parents agreed to this? The silence lasted 4 seconds. Riley counted. Your parents, Katerina said carefully, were no longer able to make that decision by the time it was made. The words landed in Riley's chest like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread outward through her ribs, her stomach, her throat. She gripped the edge of the table. What does that mean? It means I cannot tell you everything about your parents right now. Not because I am protecting myself, but because the full story requires documents I do not have with me, and because some of what I know is contested even within Honest Russia. I will not give you half a truth about them and let you build a false picture. They deserve better than that. You deserve better. That's not good enough. I know. Riley pushed back from the table. The chair legs shrieked against tile. She stood, walked 3 paces to the kitchen window, and pressed her palms flat against the cold counter. Her reflection in the dark glass stared back, hollow-eyed, jaw tight, the face of someone who had been awake too long and learned too much, and not nearly enough. You said Henrik Rask carried guilt, Riley said without turning around. You said he was one of the people who maintained the lie. So why did he reach out now? What changed?
Several things changed at once. Katerina's voice came from behind her, measured and low. Over the past year, the political situation in Russia has become more volatile. Opposition networks have been crushed. Exiled figures have been targeted. The regime is consolidating in ways that make certain factions within Honest Russia believe the moment for exposure is approaching. What some of them call the reckoning window. And Rask disagreed? Henrik did not care about the reckoning window. He cared about your safety. What changed for him was not politics. It was intelligence. Approximately 3 months ago, Henrik received information, through channels I am still tracing, that your identities had been compromised. Not publicly, not through media or genealogical databases, through an internal breach. Someone inside Honest Russia sold pieces of File 17 to actors connected to Russian state intelligence. Riley turned from the window. The opportunists. Almost certainly. Henrik did not know which individual, but he knew that the custodian index, the document mapping all the holders and locations of File 17 material, had been copied. Once that index was in hostile hands, every person, every safe house, every archive connected to your records became a target. Including Rask himself. Including Henrik. Including me. Including the families who raised you, though they know nothing about any of this. Including anyone whose name appears in the index. Elliot leaned forward in his chair. The movement was slight, an inch, perhaps two, but Riley saw the change in his center of gravity, the way his weight shifted from observation to engagement. The man who watched Rask's apartment on Thomas Heftius Gate, Elliot said. He was there because someone with the custodian index sent him. That is what I believe, yes. Then they already know about you. Katerina didn't blink. I have operated under that assumption since the night Henrik was killed. The radiator ticked. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled along Parkveien, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen ceiling in a pale bar of yellow that traveled wall to wall and vanished. Henrik waited too long, Katerina said. She addressed this to the space between Riley and Elliot, to both of them, and neither. He should have contacted you months ago, when the breach was first suspected. He argued for it. The majority of the Northern Table overruled him. They believed the protocols would hold. Henrik disagreed. I disagreed. We were told to wait. Her voice thinned on the word, wait. A thread pulled taut. Henrik stopped waiting. He prepared the envelopes himself. He chose the National Museum because he still had access through his archival credentials, and he believed a semi-public institution would be safer than a private location. He was wrong about that. He underestimated how fast the information had traveled. He was dead before we got there, Riley said. Yes. Killed by the people who obtained the custodian index. Killed by an operative working with information provided by someone who obtained the index. The distinction matters. The person who sold the information is not necessarily the person who ordered Henrik's death. There are layers. There are always layers. Riley heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't care. That's how organizations like yours function. Enough layers that no one has to feel responsible. Katerina absorbed this without defense. You are right to be angry. I'm not angry. I'm trying to understand why a man who helped steal my brother from me waited 27 years to feel bad about it. The word brother hung in the air. Riley hadn't used it before, not out loud. The sound of it changed the temperature in the room. Elliot was watching her. She could feel it without looking. Katerina opened the leather document case that had sat on the counter behind her since they'd arrived. She drew out a small object wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. The kind used for archival preservation, Riley noted. The kind Rask would have used. Katerina unwrapped it with the deliberate care of someone handling something that could not be replaced. It was a photograph. Black and white, slightly yellowed at the edges, printed on heavy paper stock. Small, perhaps 10 by 13 centimeters. The kind of photograph taken in a hospital or home, not a studio. Katerina placed it on the table between the 2 cups of cooling tea. Henrik kept this in his private collection. It is one of only 3 copies. The others are in separate locations within the File 17 archive. This one he carried personally. Riley picked it up. 2 infants, wrapped together in the same knitted blanket, handmade, the pattern irregular in a way that suggested a specific person's hands, not a factory. The babies were asleep. One had a fist curled against the other's chest. Their faces were turned slightly toward each other, as if, even in sleep, they understood they were not alone. Riley turned the photograph over. Handwriting,
Blue ink, slightly faded, the letters careful and small, written by someone who understood that this piece of paper would need to last. SAN/MHN. Oslo, 1998. Riley's fingers went numb. The photograph trembled, and she steadied it with her other hand, pressing it flat against the table as if it might fly away. SAN. Sophia Anna Nikolaisen. MHN. Mikhail Henrik Nikolaisen. The initials from the envelope flaps. R-17. E-17. But before those coded designations existed, before honest Russia's filing system reduced them to reference numbers, they had been names. Real names. Given by someone who had held them, wrapped them in a blanket, written on the back of this photograph, and then… what? Handed them to strangers? Lost them? Had them taken? Sophia Anna, Riley said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. That was the name your mother gave you. And Mikhail Henrik. She looked at Elliot. He hadn't moved. His hands were flat on his thighs, fingers spread, the posture of someone pressing down to keep from shaking. His blue-gray eyes were fixed on the photograph with an intensity that had nothing to do with analysis or tactical assessment. He was looking at it the way a person looks at the edge of a cliff they've just walked to the rim of. Riley slid the photograph across the table toward him. He picked it up with one hand, turned it over, read the initials, turned it back, studied the two sleeping infants with their curled fists and shared blanket. He said nothing. The silence was louder than anything Riley had heard in the past 48 hours. Louder than the police station. Louder than the dead man in the museum basement. Louder than the footsteps in the Munch Museum gallery. This silence was the sound of a man discovering that the shape of his entire life had been drawn by other people's hands. Mikhail, Riley said, testing the name, offering it to him. Elliot set the photograph down on the table. He placed it precisely between the two teacups, centering it as if alignment mattered. His jaw worked once. He didn't speak. Katerina watched them both with an expression that could have been compassion, or could have been the careful attention of someone assessing how much more weight a structure could bear. The initials on the envelope flaps, Riley said, pulling herself back to solid ground. R-17 for me, E-17 for him. Those were Henrik's references, not our real initials. Correct. Henrik created the R and the E designations when you were placed with your adoptive families. R for Riley, E for Elliot. The 17 connected you to file 17. He maintained those designations in his own records for the rest of his life. He tracked us. He monitored you. Both of you. Not personally. He was not standing outside your schools or following your daily movements. But he received periodic reports, academic records, health updates, general welfare assessments. He knew when Riley went to Yale. He knew when Elliot went to MIT. He knew when Elliot completed military service. He knew where you both lived in Oslo. Periodic reports, Riley repeated. From whom? From contacts within the social systems and professional networks adjacent to your lives. People who did not know the full picture, but who reported observations to a handler, who passed them to the northern table. People around us were reporting on us. Not your families. Your adoptive parents were new part of this. They were chosen specifically because they had no connection to honest Russia and no knowledge of the background. But people in the wider orbit, a teacher here, a medical professional there, a community contact, yes. Some were reporting without understanding why. Riley pressed her palms against the table. The wood grain dug into her skin. She needed something physical to anchor against, because the floor of her life had become theoretical. You monitored 2 children for 27 years. You had people reporting on our health, our education, our movements. You knew we existed, knew we were siblings, knew where we lived, and you never once considered that we had a right to know each other? We considered it every you. The debate never stopped.
The debate. Riley's voice dropped low and precise, the register she used in professional settings when controlled fury served better than volume. 27 years of debate about whether 2 people deserved to know they had a sibling. And the conclusion, every single year, was no. The conclusion was not yet. The distinction, there is no distinction. Not yet and no produce the same result when you're the person living inside the lie. Katerina's mouth thinned. She didn't argue. She sat with Riley's words as if they were a weight she had agreed to carry. You are correct, she said. The result was the same. Henrik understood that. It is why he broke protocol. It is why he sent the envelopes himself, used his own initials, chose to act without authorization. He had spent decades telling himself that keeping you apart was keeping you safe. When the breach happened, and your names appeared on a list that should never have existed, he realized that the separation had not protected you. It had only delayed the danger, while ensuring that when it came, you would face it as strangers instead of family. Riley picked up the photograph again. She held it carefully, by the edges, the way Katerina had unwrapped it, as if the paper itself was as fragile as what it represented. 2 babies under a blanket, curled toward each other, their whole world contained in the space between their bodies. Someone had taken this photograph. Someone had written those initials with a steady hand and blue ink. Someone had looked at these 2 infants and known that what was about to happen to them, the separation, the renaming, the placement into different families in different neighborhoods with different histories, was not a rescue. It was a severing. Who wrote the initials? Riley asked. Katerina's composure slipped. Just a fracture, a tightening around the eyes, a breath drawn a half beat too fast. She recovered, but Riley caught it. Your mother. 3 syllables. The weight of them pressed the air out of the room. Riley stared at the handwriting on the back of the photograph. Small, careful letters. Blue ink. A woman she had never known, writing the names she had chosen for her children on the back of a photograph she must have understood she might never show them. SAN/MHN. Oslo, 1998. What was her name? I will tell you. But not in this room, not at this hour, and not without the documents that allow you to see the full picture. I gave Henrik my word that if anything happened to him, I would not repeat his mistake of offering fragments that could be misunderstood. You're still managing us. I am trying to give you the truth in a form that will not be used against you by the people who are looking for exactly this kind of evidence. If I tell you your mother's name, and someone is listening to this conversation, through surveillance, through a compromised device, through a contact we have not identified, then that name becomes a search term.
It leads to records. Records lead to the remaining pieces of File 17. And File 17 in hostile hands is not a family history. It is a weapon. Riley wanted to argue, wanted to push through Katerina's careful rationing and demand everything at once. Every name, every date, every document that had been kept from her for 27 years. But the analyst in her understood the operational logic. She hated that she understood it. She hated that her professional training made her complicit in the very kind of information control that had shaped her entire life. She set the photograph down, gently. Fine, but I'm keeping this. It was Henrik's. I believe he would have wanted you to have it. Riley slid the photograph into the inner pocket of her jacket, pressing it flat against her chest. The paper was warm from her hands. Elliot still hadn't spoken. He sat in the chair by the hallway, hands on his thighs, shoulders square, face unreadable. The military stillness that Riley had noticed in him from the first night was no longer tactical. It was structural. The posture of a man holding himself together through discipline because feeling would bring him down. Riley watched him. Elliot. He met her eyes. For a moment she saw past the composure, past the flat professional calm, past the construction engineer and the army officer and the man who checked exits and counted threats. Underneath all of it was something raw and bewildered. The expression of someone who had just been told that the foundation he'd built his life on had been poured over empty air. Mikhail, he said. Quiet, testing the shape of the name in his mouth, the way she had tested brother earlier. Finding it foreign, finding it his. We were together, Riley said. She touched the pocket where the photograph lay. Before any of this, we were together. His jaw worked. He looked away, at the window, the wall, the emergency bags in the corner, places where his eyes could land without breaking anything open. Yeah, he said. One word, all he could manage. Katerina watched them both with the stillness of someone who understood that what was happening between Riley and Elliot in this kitchen was more important than anything she could say. The older woman's hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were wet, though no tears fell. Riley turned back to Katerina. The anger hadn't left her. It had settled deeper into the place where permanent things lived. But layered over it now was something else. A need to understand that outweighed the need to blame. You said several things changed at once. The breach, the custodian index, the political situation in Russia. But you haven't explained why File 17 matters to Russian state intelligence. What makes two Norwegian-raised people dangerous enough to kill an archivist and deploy surveillance teams in Oslo? That, Katerina said, is connected to your biological family's history. And that history is connected to records that are not mine to summarize in a kitchen at 5 a.m. without the documents. Yes, you've said. I understand your frustration. You don't. You participated in this for decades. You don't get to understand my frustration. You get to answer my questions. Katerina inclined her head. I will tell you this much. File 17 does not simply document your family's genealogy. It documents a specific claim, symbolic, not legal, that connects your bloodline to a chapter of Russian imperial history that the current regime has spent considerable effort erasing. The people looking for you are not concerned that you will walk into Moscow and declare yourself a monarch. They are concerned that your existence if verified and publicized, becomes a narrative. A story that opposition groups, exile networks, monarchists, reformists, and foreign intelligence services could use. A symbol. Precisely. You asked last night not to be treated as symbols. I respect that. But the people pursuing you do not. To them, you are not Riley and Elliot. You are not Sofia and Mikhail. You are a disruption in a carefully maintained historical fiction. And disruptions are dealt with. The delivery truck outside had moved on. The street was quiet again. Gray light pressed harder against the kitchen windows, the dawn coming on in that slow northern way. Not a burst of color, but a gradual surrender of darkness, reluctant and cold. Riley felt the photograph against her chest. 2 infants. A blanket. Initials written by a woman whose name she didn't know yet. A brother sitting 3 meters away who had been a stranger 48 hours ago, and who was now the only person in the world who understood what it meant to discover that your life was a cover story. I need air, she said. She pushed back from the table, chair legs scraping, and walked toward the hallway. Riley, Katerina's voice, sharp. Do not go outside. I'm going to the back stairwell, the enclosed one. Elliot checked it last night. No exterior access, no windows below the 3rd floor. I need 2 minutes, that's all. She didn't wait for permission. She walked down the corridor, past the bedroom where she hadn't slept, past the bathroom with its medicinal soap smell, and through the fire door into the back stairwell. The concrete was cold. The air smelled of dust and old paint. A single bulb on a timer cast hard shadows down the steps. Riley leaned against the wall, pressed her forehead to the concrete. Breathed. Sofia Anna Nikolaisen. The name didn't fit. It was the right name, the first name, the name written by her mother's hand, and it didn't fit because she had never worn it. 27 years of being Riley Hunt, the girl from Grunnerlocke, the Yale graduate, the political risk analyst who could brief NATO officials without flinching, and underneath all of it, a name she'd never been called, a brother she'd never been told about, a history she'd never been allowed to touch. She thought about what Katerina had said. The conclusion was, not yet. 27 years of not yet. 27 years of someone else's timetable. 27 years of a life that was real and earned and hers, built on top of a lie she hadn't chosen. Riley straightened, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Dry, she realized. No tears. The grief was there, but it lived below the waterline, too deep to reach the surface. What reached the surface was clarity.
She walked back into the kitchen. Elliot had moved. He was standing now, by the window, angled so he could see the street below without being visible from outside. His body language had changed. The frozen stillness was gone. In its place was something Riley recognized from the construction site escape, from the basement of the museum, from every moment when Elliot's training overrode his emotions. He was alert. Something's wrong, he said. Katerina was already on her feet. The teacups sat abandoned, tea gone cold. The document case was closed, clutched under her arm. What did you see? Katerina's voice had dropped to a register Riley hadn't heard before. Clipped, operational, stripped of the careful diplomatic cadence she'd maintained all night. Car, dark sedan, parked across the street, engine running. It wasn't there 20 minutes ago. Could be a resident. At 5 a.m, in a no parking zone, with the driver's silhouette still behind the wheel? No. Katerina crossed to the window.
She didn't look through it. She pressed herself against the wall beside the frame and tilted her head just enough to see the glass at an angle. Dark blue or black? Black. Newer model. Tinted rear windows. How long has it been there? 6 minutes. The engine turned on 3 minutes ago. No one has gotten out. Riley moved toward the window, but Elliot blocked her path with his arm. Not rough, not grabbing, just a barrier placed with the economy of someone who had done this before. Stay back. If they're watching the windows, they need to see the same thing they've been seeing. Empty glass, closed curtains. The curtains are open, Riley said. Katerina opened them at 4:30. Light on, curtains open, normal morning routine. Closing them now signals awareness. Katerina was already moving toward the hallway. There is something else. Listen. Riley listened. For a moment, she heard nothing beyond the radiator, the distant hum of the city waking, a bird on the roof. Then it came. A sound in the stairwell. Not the back stairwell, where Riley had just been standing. The front one. The main entrance stairs. A door closing softly. 2 floors down, maybe 3. The kind of close that someone performs when they're thinking about the noise they're making. Not a slam, not a resident's casual pull. A controlled, deliberate placement of a door into its frame, followed by a pause, as if someone was listening to whether the sound had carried. Elliot looked at Riley. His face was calm, but his eyes had changed. The blue-gray had gone hard, the way water goes hard when it freezes. Front stairwell, he said. Someone came in through the street entrance. That door has a code lock, Katerina said. Then they have the code. Another sound. Footsteps. Careful, measured, ascending. Not fast. The pace of someone who didn't want to announce their approach, but also wasn't in a hurry. The pace of someone who knew exactly which floor they were heading to. Katerina's hand went to the emergency bags. She lifted 2, the ones she'd shown them last night, packed with cash, phones, maps, and supplies, and set them silently on the kitchen counter. Back stairwell, she said. Now. Wait! Elliot held up his hand. He moved to the front door of the flat and pressed his ear against it. 3 seconds. 5. He held up 2 fingers without turning around. 2 people. 2 sets of footsteps, staggered. One slightly heavier than the other. Professional spacing. Close enough to support each other, far enough apart that a single obstacle wouldn't stop both. Riley's pulse hammered in her throat. She picked up one emergency bag and slung it over her shoulder. The weight was reassuring, solid, real, something she could carry. The photograph, she whispered, hand going to her jacket pocket. Still there, pressed against her sternum. Katerina took the second bag. She moved toward the back corridor with a fluidity that didn't match her age, her steps soundless on the tile. She'd done this before. Maybe not recently, but the muscle memory was there, laid down in a past that Riley understood she knew almost nothing about. Elliot picked up the bolt cutters he'd found under the kitchen sink the previous night. He hadn't mentioned bringing them. He'd carried them from the Campen flat without a word, the way he carried everything useful, silently, automatically, as if preparation were a form of breathing. The footsteps in the front stairwell had stopped. 1 floor below, maybe less. Silence. The worst kind, not absence of sound, but the presence of listening. Whoever was on the stairs had paused, and the pause meant they were deciding. Checking a door number, confirming a floor, or waiting for a signal from the car outside.
Elliot's head turned toward the kitchen window. Riley followed his gaze. The sedan's headlights had gone off. The engine was still running,
She could see the faintest pulse of exhaust in the cold morning air. But the lights were dark. Waiting. "Move," Elliot said. Not loud. The word carried the same weight as a shout. They went through the fire door into the back stairwell in the order Elliot set. Katerina first, Riley second, himself last. He pulled the fire door shut behind him and wedged a wooden doorstop from the hallway under its base. A 30-second delay, maybe less, but 30 seconds was 30 seconds. The back stairwell was concrete, cold, lit by that single timer bulb. Riley had been here 2 minutes ago, pressing her forehead to the wall, breathing through the discovery of a name that had been hers before she was Riley Hunt. Now the same space was an escape route, and the concrete walls felt like a chute designed to funnel them downward. Katerina descended fast, one hand on the railing, the other clutching the document case. Her footsteps were light. She counted floors under her breath. Tredje, andre, første. A metronome of controlled urgency. At the ground floor, Katerina stopped. A metal fire exit door blocked the way to the building's rear courtyard. A push bar ran across its center, but a small padlock had been threaded through the bar's bracket, the kind of improvised security measure landlords installed to prevent unauthorized access. Elliot stepped past both women. He positioned the bolt cutters on the padlock's shackle, set his feet, and squeezed. The metal resisted for 1 second. 2. Then the shackle parted with a sound like a branch snapping, and the padlock dropped to the concrete floor with a dull ring that echoed up the stairwell. Above them, a door opened. The fire door to flat 3B. The wedge held for a beat. Riley heard the scrape of wood against tile, then gave way. Footsteps in the corridor. Fast now, no longer careful. Elliot pushed the bar. The fire exit swung outward into a narrow courtyard filled with bicycles, recycling bins, and a rusted drying rack. Gray dawn light poured in. Cold air hit Riley's face. The courtyard was enclosed on 3 sides by apartment buildings, but the 4th side opened onto a passage between buildings, a small, the kind of narrow pedestrian gap that older Oslo neighborhoods used as shortcuts between streets. "Left," Katerina said. "The passage comes out on Hegdehaugsveien. Cross toward the park. Do not run until you have to." Riley moved. Her boots hit wet cobblestones. The emergency bag bounced against her hip. The photograph pressed against her chest. Behind her, she heard Elliot pull the fire door shut and jam something against it from the outside. One of the bicycle wheels, bent and wedged under the push bar. Another delay. Another 30 seconds bought. They entered the passage. Walls rose on either side, close enough that Riley could touch both if she extended her arms. The ground was uneven, old paving stones slick with overnight moisture. Light leaked in from both ends. Sounds from Parkveien, a car accelerating, a voice, a door, filtered through the gap behind them. Katerina moved ahead, the document case under her arm, emergency bag on her shoulder, her pace fast but not panicked. She didn't look back. She walked with the focused determination of someone executing a plan she'd rehearsed, and the thought struck Riley with uncomfortable force. Katerina had always expected this moment. The safe flat on Parkveien was not a permanent shelter. It was a way station. And the emergency bags, the border maps, the packed cash, those were not precautions. They were admissions. Admissions that honest Russia's protection had always been temporary, always contingent, always one breach away from collapse. They emerged onto Hegdehaugsveien. The street was waking, a bakery's lights on, a bus stop empty but lit, a cyclist passing in silence. Normal life proceeding at its normal pace, oblivious to 3 people stepping out of a narrow passage with emergency bags and stolen bolt cutters, and a photograph of 2 infants who had been torn apart before they could remember each other's faces. "Don't look back," Elliot said. Riley didn't look back. They crossed the street, walked toward the park. 3 people on an early morning walk. Nothing to see. Nothing worth remembering, except that Riley's hands were shaking, and the photograph in her pocket felt like the most dangerous thing she had ever carried.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.